The Voyage of St. Brendan is believed to have occurred sometime between 512 and 530 AD, and since then, the adventurous narrative has become one of the most famous journeys of exploration in human history. While nobody takes issue with the idea St. Brendan and his crew of monks explored vast swaths of the Atlantic Ocean for years, the distance he traveled is hotly debated. Some maintain he never left the British Isles. Others say he made it to Iceland and Greenland. And a select vocal minority steadfastly claims he was the first European to discover America. For the sake of sticking to the topic of this video, I will not be rehashing the entire voyage of St. Brendan today. However, if you crave that additional context, feel free to check out my video covering the whole journey. I'll link to it in the description below. While curious rock carvings and certain megalithic structures found throughout America's northeast are cause for speculation of an Irish discovery of America, rather than sifting through peculiar etches in these stones, let's focus on clues the Voyage of St. Brendan provides us. Because the best evidence medieval Irish monks stepped foot on North American soil before the Vikings did may in fact be the story itself. First and foremost, we must establish that the nature of a near-Arctic voyage from Ireland to America differs significantly from the mid-Atlantic route Christopher Columbus used to reach America in 1492. Columbus sailed clear across open ocean for just over a month, with nothing in sight but sea and sky. Conversely, the near-Arctic voyage to America that starts from Ireland is more akin to island hopping. One begins in Ireland, then sails to northern Britain, through the Faroe and Orkney archipelagos to Iceland, then Greenland, and ultimately the east coast of Canada. We've all seen Titanic, and it's fair to question whether or not St. Brendan's vessel was physically capable of getting him and his crew to North America. Let's address this matter. Prepared to place their collective fate in the hands of the Almighty Creator, these men trekked to the most remote part of Dark Age Ireland, where they constructed a small boat called a Curragh. United States Navy veteran and Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Samuel Eliot Morison elaborates on the vessel's seaworthiness. Being little more than a big wicker basket covered with skins, she, the Curragh, rode the waves like a cork and stayed dry in heavy seas which broke over any heavy wooden ships. Furthermore, in 1976, British explorer and historian Tim Severin reconstructed using traditional tools and methods an exact replica of the boat St. Brendan would have used. Come May of that same year, aboard the medieval-style vessel, Severin set out to prove St. Brendan's legendary voyage possible. The adventure took him from Ireland to Newfoundland in about 13 months. Real-world locations have been identified to match many of the places St. Brendan described visiting on his voyage. For instance, the Faroes and Soay can be interpreted as the islands of the birds and of sheep. The submarine volcano eruption may have been from one of those near Iceland. And of course, icebergs are readily available in the northernmost reaches of the North Atlantic Ocean. The most important stop of his journey, the thought of which being the whole reason he embarked upon his voyage to begin with, the land of promise of the saints, however, has yet to be tied to any known country. That's because the natural environment described there doesn't quite fit the isles north of Britain, Iceland, or Greenland. Whether somebody believes he made it to America or not, St. Brendan paints for readers a land distant to the west that resembles Canada's east coast. In order to supply greater historical context regarding a voyage so far-reaching, the Greek explorer Pytheas of Massalia is the first person to record on paper the existence of Iceland. He did so around 325 BC, 800 years before St. Brendan was born. Pythias was guided to the island by Scottish natives. If seamen in the northern British Isles were already familiar enough with Iceland to lead a complete foreigner there in 325 BC, how much further could people in the region have explored in the 8 subsequent centuries building up to St. Brendan's voyage? Iceland is much closer to Greenland than it is to Scotland. If you've enjoyed this video so far, please consider giving it a thumbs up, as that simple action does more for the channel than you and I could probably even imagine. That's my one and only shameless self-promo. One evening, St. Brendan was visited by a priest named Berinthus, who had left the area to visit brethren living in far-flung, isolated monastic cells, like those otherworldly abodes found on the Skellig Islands. A decent number of Irish monks preferred to distance themselves from the heathenistic temptations of human civilization, ventured to remote areas, and enjoyed a hermit lifestyle. What might this have entailed? On his journey, St. Brendan encounters Paul the Hermit, who lived in a cave, wore no clothes, but was covered head to toe with the hair of his body, and made his living by the sustenance God provided, as well as the help of a little critter, perhaps a marten. How acceptable was this way of life to St. Brendan? He marveled at the nature of Paul the Hermit's existence, saying, "I see here a man of angelic condition, dwelling still in the flesh, yet unbothered by the vices of the flesh." What is the furthest most point Catholic monks reached in their efforts to live as hermits? That's tough to determine, given the tenets of the lifestyle, and especially if the person is dwelling in a cave rather than a man-made structure. There could be literally not a single sign left of their existence on this earth. We do know when the Vikings arrived in Iceland, they stumbled upon who they knew as Papar, Christian men with Irish books, bells, hooked staffs, and other belongings. The early Norse settlers concluded these were Irish members of the Catholic Church. Their property was discovered eastward in Pape Isle and Papal. Believe it or not, plenty of the monks were probably more upset to see the Viking colonizers than the Vikings were to see them. The devout men of God would have considered the newcomers heathenistic parasites, antithetical to the purpose of their hermit lifestyle. As the Vikings settled in with their women, children, and cattle, the Irish monks abandoned the island in an effort to maintain a sense of purity. Within several years, the Norse had Iceland all to themselves. So, where did the Irishmen go? Some surely returned home to Ireland, and rather curiously, there's reason to believe others continued venturing west and arrived on the east coast of modern-day Canada. According to the Landnama book, a medieval text that outlines in considerable detail the settlement of Iceland by the Norse in the 9th and 10th centuries, an Icelandic man named Ari Marson drifted over the ocean to white men's land, which some call Ireland the Great, and lies west away in the ocean next to Vinland the Good. Vinland's exact location is not known, though scholars generally accept that the region included Newfoundland, and may have extended south into Nova Scotia and coastal New Brunswick. The discovery of a Norse settlement at Lance Meadows lent powerful support to those who believed Vinland was in Newfoundland. Per the Saga of St. Olaf, there is, as stated, south of the part of Greenland which has settlements, wastelands, unsettled regions, and glaciers. Skrellings, then Markland, then Vinland the Good. Next to it, and a little beyond, lies Albania, which is white men's land. For reference, Skrellings is a derogatory term Vikings used when referring to indigenous Americans. In total, there are 4 lands west of Greenland the Norse identified: Helluland, Markland, Vinland, and Whitemen's Land. Helluland is associated with Baffin Island, the unsettled wasteland boasting glaciers. Markland was situated south of Helluland and north of Vinland, and it was a source for timber, which puts it on Canada's Labrador coast. Vinland, as previously mentioned, is located somewhere within the vicinity of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Finally, there is Whitemen's Land, which existed adjacent to and south of Vinland. Whitemen's Land was populated by people dressed in white garments who uttered loud cries, bore long poles, and wore fringes, or, in other words, robes. Could the white garments have been priestly robes, loud cries the singing of praises of God, and long poles the same staffs Vikings previously encountered when they settled Iceland? Why is there a consensus that Vinland, Markland, and Helluland were real places, but Whitemen's Land, which is discussed in the Nordic sagas as though it is just as real as the other territories, gets met with disbelief? Regardless, Ari was allegedly welcomed with open arms to Whitemen's Land by Irishmen and Icelanders who recognized him. These people christened Ari, and afterwards he decided to stay and was held in much honor there. One would have to imagine the Irishmen and Icelanders who christened, or in other words, baptized Ari, were members of the Catholic Church. Hence, this Nordic saga places Irish monks on North American soil. Some of you might be wondering, could Irish monks have coexisted alongside Native American tribes? That's an excellent question. The clergymen would not have been arriving with women, families, or intentions to colonize, farm, or even build homes. Needless to say, they would have kept an extremely low profile. Recall the nature of Paul the Hermit's existence. If these men stayed out of the way like they desired to do, consumed minimal sustenance from their surrounding environment, and didn't antagonize nearby indigenous people, I can't see why the seasonally migrating Native American tribes, without compelling reason, wouldn't tolerate their limited presence. Let's get back to the Voyage of St. Brendan, which took place over 300 years before the Norse settled so far as Iceland. Where were we? Ah, yes. One evening, St. Brendan was visited by a priest named Berinthus, who had left the area to visit brethren living in far-flung, isolated monastic cells. St. Brendan rejoiced at the man's long-awaited return and asked about his trip. After sharing the good condition of the brethren he meant to see, Berinthus brought up a second, unexpected leg to his journey. It featured an encounter with the land of promise of the saints, the paradisical destination that inspired St. Brendan to embark on his own famous voyage, with the goal of finding the place. Using Berinthus and St. Brendan's testimony on the land of promise of the saints, we are going to piece together which country in the North Atlantic best fits their descriptions. For starters, both Berinthus and St. Brendan happened upon a man who served as their guide to the land. Berinthus encountered this person 3 days' sail north of where he set off from in Ireland. St. Brendan met his guide 40 days after departing Ireland. There isn't a whole lot of information available about who St. Brendan's guide was. The mysterious man is simply referred to as the procurator in the story. Berinthus's guide, however, is an abbot named Murnoch. He apparently ventured to the land of promise of the saints quite frequently, considering his flock of monks complained that he'd spend weeks away at a time from them. In each case, the guide took the men west. St. Brendan's told him, "I will be the companion and conductor of your journey henceforth, for without my guidance, you could not find the land you seek. Before leaving, St. Brendan packed 40 days worth of provisions, as this was the duration of time he and his brethren could expect their voyage to last. Upon arriving at the doorstep of the land of promise of the saints, both men testify sailing through a thick layer of fog. A dense cloud overshadowed St. Brendan and company, so dark they could scarcely see one another. The guide asked the saint, "Do you know, Father, what darkness this is?" The saint replied that he knew not. The guide remarked, "This darkness surrounds the island you have sought for 7 years. You will soon see that it is the entrance to it." Now, where are they at this point? Across the Atlantic Ocean's near Arctic coastal regions, fog is common. We can assume these veteran seamen would have had a certain expectation of fog along the shores they were traversing. But where might there exist so much fog it'd be worth emphasizing its presence compared to other near Arctic locations? How about the foggiest place on Earth? According to the Guinness Book of World Records, the foggiest sea level place in the world can be found blanketing the ocean surface of the Grand Banks, a series of underwater plateaus southeast of the island of Newfoundland. There, the chilly Labrador Current from the north meets the much warmer Gulf Stream Current from the south, creating about 206 foggy days per year. Located in southeastern Newfoundland, a seaport named Argentia was once the site of a U.S. naval air station commissioned during World War II, and it would get fogged in for days at a time. When the fog burns off there, it starts in the inland areas, slowly making its way to the coast, so it'd take longer to dissipate at the base. Greenland, Iceland, and Britain's northernmost isles are no strangers to fog. However, what are the odds this same intense fog shows up in exactly the same spot for Berinthus and then St. Brendan years later? Having read the Voyage of St. Brendan, nowhere else in the story does he mention fog, let alone with such significance. Given the region his travels occurred in, there would have been plenty of opportunities to record fog, yet he does not mention it at any other point. Contrary to popular belief, Leif Erikson was not the first Viking to discover America. That hallowed distinction belongs to Bjarni Herjolfsson, who was accidentally carried past Greenland by northern winds, lost his sense of direction for days while traveling through a thick fog, and arrived at a hill-dappled, well-wooded territory that is now acknowledged to have been Canada's east coast. Based on descriptions of Greenland Herjolfsson had heard, and more pointedly, the country's clear lack of coastal mountains and a very large glacier, he understood this could not have been their intended destination. Despite groans from crew members who wanted to settle the bountiful land, Herjolfsson embarked into the sea once more, until he ultimately arrived in Greenland, where he shared the tale of his discovery. With that being said, where would there be so thick a fog consistently in the same location, per St. Brendan's guide's use of it as a metaphorical door to the land of promise of the saints, 40 days sail west of the northernmost isles of Britain? Again, how about the foggiest place on Earth, just off Canada's east coast? Back to the story. After an hour of sailing through the thick, dark fog like none other St. Brendan had ever seen, a great light shone around them, and the boat stood by the shore. Our dear Berinthus shared the same experience. After disembarking, they each saw an endless land thickly set with trees, many of which bore fruits. Barinthus reported spacious and grassy pastures, flower fields, and many precious stones and gems. He walked around the island for 15 days, yet could not reach its end. Only a large river that flowed from west to east. He stood on its banks, contemplating a way to cross it. Saint Brendan and his monks traversed the same island for 40 days and could not find its end. They likewise encountered a large, impassable river flowing towards what they perceived to be the middle of the land. Both Barinthus and Saint Brendan made a peculiar astronomical observation. Each noted that during their entire stay in the territory, there was no night. A light always shone, like the light of the sun in the meridian. Could this be the midnight sun, a natural phenomenon that occurs in the summer months in places north of the Arctic Circle, when the sun remains visible at the local midnight? Based on the terrain described by St. Brendan and Barinthus, in my humble opinion, Greenland can be ruled out. There is literally only one forest on the near continent-sized island, the majority of which is sparsely populated in vegetation, primarily comprising grassland and small shrubs. At its center, Greenland possesses the world's second largest ice sheet. It covers around 80% of the island's surface. What soil there is to walk on amounts to the narrow, barren, mountainous, rocky coast. When Eric the Red got there several hundred years after St. Brendan's voyage, he purposely gave it a misleading name because it would encourage people to go there if the land had a good name. Iceland, on the other hand, fits the description better. Although only 2% of the island's surface is covered with trees today, when the Vikings arrived, forests may have covered as much as 40% of its area. Iceland also has the midnight sun and native fruits like berries. Despite it being the conservative thing to do, I still don't feel comfortable saying the land of promise of the saints is Iceland. If Pythias, a foreign Greek sailor, was taken there by Scottish guides on a northerly voyage that lasted just 6 days over 800 years before, I can't help but doubt Saint Brendan, the Navigator, a man celebrated for spending years traversing the region's high seas, would have been completely unaware of Iceland's existence, endured 7 years of pilgrimage before reaching it, said it was a 40-day sail far to the west, and through an incomprehensibly thick fog unlike any others near the British Isles, witnessed the island's 32 active volcanoes and molten hot lava flows, without once mentioning the treacherous sites, whilst managing to document volcanoes to the best of his abilities in other locations. Or, after exploring its terrain for 40 days, treated the 185 by 305 mile mostly barren outcrop like it was an endless, densely forested, fruit-filled, summery paradise cut in two by a humongous river. Have you ever heard anybody describe Iceland that way? The place was literally named Iceland by its very first Norse settlers. If we look back to the island of Newfoundland, not only does it feature the foggiest locality in the world, the island boasts 15 million acres of forests, covering 56% of its area. Furthermore, there are countless videos online that capture the one-of-a-kind, world-class rock hounding experience the coasts of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia have to offer. They display colorful and diverse gemstones like those described by Barinthus and St. Brendan. What throws me off is the potential midnight sun, a sight which, by my estimation, cannot be observed from Nova Scotia or the island of Newfoundland. they are too far from the Arctic Circle. Perhaps St. Brendan and Barinthus arrived in Labrador, nearer the Arctic Circle. If Iceland was significantly more wooded back then, that area may have had more vibrant forestry as well. I also wonder if the midnight sun element was tacked onto the legend by storytellers over the centuries for added dramatic effect. In the end, upon reaching the Great River, Barinthus and St. Brendan were kindly told by a young man that they were not permitted to view the other half of the island, and their pilgrimage must come to a close. They were each guided back to their boats, did as they were asked, and sailed back into the fog from which they arrived. There is a major implication here that can't be ignored. St. Brendan and Barinthus never confirmed that the land they visited was an island, for they were not permitted to see the alleged other half. This leaves open the possibility that they did arrive in Nova Scotia, coastal New Brunswick, or Labrador. Perhaps the great river they could not cross, which flowed from west to east, was the mighty St. Lawrence flowing toward the center of the land masses that surround where it meets the sea. What's also curious is St. Brendan's guide stays behind, suggesting he may have some functional relationship with the man who resides in the country. It's clear that a recognizable person who could be communicated with was already living in the land of promise of the saints. This begs the question, who was this person? Moreover, who could St. Brendan's guide have been? All things considered, I still can't definitively say the land of promise of the saints was in America. Although, if the Catholic Church possesses precious stones, whether they be standalone or part of a relic, known to have been the property of St. Brendan or from his monastery, it would be worth testing those gems to find out where on earth their source is located. The answer may just shock the world and prove once and for all whether medieval Irish monks were the first Europeans to discover America. Alrighty everybody, that's gonna do it for today's video on the evidence medieval Irish monks discovered America before the Vikings did. Let me know in the comments section what you think. Did St. Brendan actually make it to America? Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.